Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I'm delighted to be joining someone at a library. This is a library in the background, I believe, and delighted to be talking with author Stephen Bramucci. Stephen, thank you for joining and bringing all of the shelfie love back there behind you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. We've been kind of edging around each other for a little while now,
Yes, yes.
so and so I was excited to do this.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. Absolutely. We found a time that works, and that is good.
There we go.
Yeah. So I usually mention a couple of titles at the beginning. You've created for National Geographic, I believe. You have a series called Danger Gang, if I'm getting that right. And you also have Race for the Ruby Turtle. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, those are all. And then I've written some humor anthologies for adults. I've written about hip hop music. There's a whole other side of my life that is in the rap music world. Um, and as a travel writer, I've done endless guidebooks, and I think you can still read my guide to Melbourne's coffee scene for fedors and afar and those sorts of things. But yeah, the core of my children's writing is those three novels that you mentioned, the Danger Gang series, and then the Nat Geo nonfiction books.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that you're mentioning jazz or rap and hip hop as well as travel, so it sounds like we have lots of common interests musically, in terms of beverages, all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I live an incredibly eclectic life that was partially by design and partially through, stumbling into things and partially through, like, to be perfectly frank, um, when your artistic successes are not so big that you can only do one thing, you end up having to do a bunch of things. And
Hmm.
I'm very, very fortunate to have constructed a life where I have to work tremendously hard in a way that actually doesn't lend itself to how my brain works necessarily, but I've really trained myself. Um, but also, I do get to work tremendously hard at all things that I love, which is an incredible privilege.
The thing that seems to unite so many of those things is the written word. So I'm curious how that became part of your life and how you knew that you wanted to be an author and write across different types of books.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. The answer is unfortunately, or not unfortunately, everyone comes to these things differently. I think that for me, I actually come to writing in many ways through oral storytelling.
Hmm. Hmm.
Certainly, like in deciding that I wanted to make a life of it. I'm coming to you from the Laguna Beach Library, where I work most days for reasons that we'll also probably discuss in the interview. But I used to teach. I used to teach kindergarten here in Laguna Beach, and I would tell stories every day. And the way that those oral stories galvanized the kids and excited the kids and made them, I remember the first time I caught a kid like telling his mom, I told you not to come until 4 o'clock, like really showed me that I had something. And I think I actually had to learn the writing bit of it. Certainly, like the how to plot through the middle of a novel was
Hmm.
something that I didn't have. I had voice, I had characterization, but I didn't have that bit. Yeah, so while I had a love of books and have always had a love of books, my mom was really great at reading to me. There was the writing really came through oral storytelling.
Hmm. Hmm. Nice, nice. I love that. And as somebody who has visited kindergarten classrooms, it is quite the task. It is quite the task. So kudos to you for having
Yeah.
children that wanted to stay at the end of the day.
It is
Uh,
a task. I have two kindergartners right now, so it is a task. But yeah, it's fun for me. It's fun. I really got that's a great way to earn your chops. The
mm,
closest I would compare it to is someone saying like, I went to the Comedy Cellar and I went up every night. And I some nights I got heckled. Some nights there was someone who was too drunk in the front row, and the oral storyteller version of that is like I went up every day for 3 years in front of kindergartners, and some days a kid came in from recess hot with scratches on his face because he had had a meltdown with another kid,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you learn how to really like shape an audience.
Yeah.
So, I hope some of those skills have transferred into my writing. I know the what I do know from just feedback from readers is like the desire to drop someone into a movie with words has transferred.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
feedback that I get constantly, is that your books feel not like movies in the way that would kind of feel conceited in me saying like, God, why hasn't someone from Hollywood called me? But more like they play like movies across the mindscape, because
Hmm.
I'm pretty precise with my language, and I come from travel writing. I'm pretty precise with setting and scene setting, and also like, where is everyone?
Yeah.
And if their arms move like this in this moment, what else can they be doing or not be doing? Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It's grounded work, is what I'm hearing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Curious about the sort of topics, the things that draw you to writing for children, because the travel work sounds fascinating, the hip hop and rap work sounds fascinating, but how does all of that translate when you're writing for a younger audience?
It's a good question. I mean, you know, the joke that I typically make is that I knew that I didn't want to like write about middle class conflict,
Right,
marital
right.
conflict. That's a joke I often make when asked why I write for kids. But I think like a more precise joke, or a more precise like way of thinking about it, is that I kind of like the same stuff, as a writer with a day job, which is a thing that a lot of writers don't talk about very publicly, because we want to think that our successes have led us to just sit in a cool tower and write drafts at our leisure.
Hmm.
As a writer with a day job, I wouldn't do this if I was having to spend all day writing about stuff that I didn't enjoy, and I
Yeah.
enjoy rope swings and big animals and garish villains, and these are things that are really fun for me. A lot of the work that I like to read reads like that. If you look at my five favorite books, I would say none of them are strictly children's books, but they all read in that way.
Mm-hmm.
They read, they have larger than life characters, and really clear direct conflicts and really high stakes and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Those story beats, they work regardless of the age, right? It's something that
Yeah,
threads through. Yeah.
yeah, and they don't work for everyone, right? Like there are people who like to read really quiet books. There are people who like to read books where the author is finding out something about themselves or their characters, and I like to think that my characters are finding out a lot about themselves too, but they're doing it in really condensed moments, because my
Hmm.
books are typically about a time of adventurous crisis in someone's life, and probably will be. Like, I can't imagine myself writing an epic. I don't really like the idea of like, you don't see a character for theoretically 7 months of their life, and then you see this one moment and somehow we're supposed to stitch that all together. That's not
Hmm.
really how my own life works. My own life is lived with a very electric sense of the moment, and things feel like they're changing every second, so I can't see myself writing giant time jumps or things like that. Every novel that I've written thus far has taken place in the span of a week.
Hmm.
My
Hmm.
next coming novel takes place in 15 days. So yeah, I mean that's kind of what appeals to me, or maybe that's like just a weakness that I have as an author. I have neither the desire nor maybe even the skill set to write like the passing of 45 years across a novel.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, that is quite a slog, and usually those books have maps at the beginning just so the reader can keep up. It's quite a
Right,
thing.
right.
Yeah. Um,
Character lists, etc.
that's right. That's right. You were talking about experiencing storytelling with your class when you were teaching kindergarten. I'm wondering about a time that you've experienced kind of a connection with a young reader in an interesting way on the author side.
Yeah, I mean, a lot on this most recent book tour. There, this is the first time that I'm speaking really publicly about ADHD. Now, for context, I'm 44,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you know, as I've spoken publicly about it and now written a book about ADHD, there's this question that comes into my life of like, why didn't I do any of this sooner? My I didn't identify as having ADHD in graduate school. I didn't identify that way in college. I had been diagnosed before all those events. And the real answer that I can find as I search myself for those answers is shame. And having a brain that's wired differently has caused me a tremendous amount of shame in my life. And you kind of like I think we have a cultural sense that that's over for people with ADHD simply because it is now the most diagnosed childhood, I would say, aspect of neurodiversity, or I don't know exactly how to phrase it. I'm not going to call it a disability,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it's heavily diagnosed, and so we think that everyone is like, yo, I have this and I'm fine. And that's not the case. So on book tour multiple times, and one time that I can really clearly remember, um, someone raised their hand, and this young girl raised her hand and she said, I have ADHD and I like books and I like to write. And I mean, she was like what my publisher probably puts into pamphlets to salespeople. She
Right,
just
right.
said it all really staccato. She was like, I have ADHD. I like to write. I like books. And you showed me that I can do it. And
Wow.
and it felt almost like she was an industry plant because she was saying it so directly, but it touched my heart.
Yeah. Yeah. And to have that sort of like unfiltered connection. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I actually went back, and it became quite a significant part of my own journey this year with the book coming out. But I just went back and spoke as an honored guest at the high school that I practically failed out of. And certainly, if not failed out of, flailed out of, because I was suspended multiple times for skipping school and just couldn't really keep anything straight there. And I was a guest of honor there, and spoke there and received a standing ovation, and had 20 kids write me saying that they felt like they could chase their dreams because they have ADHD. So that was really exciting for me.
Yeah. What an awesome kind of trajectory to your path. And by the way, it's also kind of interesting to me and kind of funny that a school would suspend you for not showing up to school. It's like
Yeah,
just kind of an interesting little note there, just something to think about for educators out there, but interesting.
no,
But
that's a funny.
I love
That's a
that
funny.
you get to come back and kind of tell that story though. I love that.
No, it was super cool, and I think I guess my point here is like when you hear about how kids have talked to me on this book tour, it sounds a lot like what my friends, you know, who are people of color talk about when they do book tour. Varian Johnson is probably my closest author connection.
Mhm.
Matt
Mhm.
De La Pena is very close to me. And when they talk about the representation conversation, I've always heard it and said, wow, that sounds really cool. And good for you. And that's awesome. I didn't expect this tour to turn into so much of that. And it did, because I think, like I say, I think, regardless of the ubiquity of ADHD in society, there's still a lot of shame around it.
Yeah.
And I still have shame around it. I mean, by the way, I deal with that shame every single day of my life. I
Mhm.
deal with like the fact that I have a bill in my backpack 10 feet away that is overdue, that I keep forgetting to pay, and somehow get through 40 days in a row without paying. The money's in the account. Bill's probably multiplied 3 times by now. I deal with that shame every single day of my life. So it's not a journey that ends by any means.
Oh, no. Well, and I appreciate your honesty about that as well and speaking about your experiences.
Oh, if I have any flaw, it would be an excess of honesty for sure. I mean, I have a lot of flaws, but that would be one of them.
Well, lots of flaws over here too, but we won't go into my flaws. We'll save those for another episode. Um, so you mentioned you have another book that's in development. I am curious to hear
Yeah.
about that and anything as far as future creativity you'd like to mention.
Yeah. So the new book is really exciting. I'm sure you and your listeners and everyone in the world still knows who Gary Paulson is.
Hmm.
His name has certainly not disappeared over the past couple of years since he passed away. He and I met really early on. I was a member of the SCBWI, and they knew of my history as an adventurer and traveler, and they kind of ushered us together. I didn't have anything published. I hadn't done anything really, and they were kind enough to be like, "Oh, you have to meet Gary," and even kind of like went to him and was like, "You have to meet this guy, Steve," which was like I say, like I had sold nothing in the children's book world, and he came up to me and he was like, he goes, he leans in real close and he goes like, "Hey, I hear you write about adventure." And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay." Kind of took it in. And he goes, "Well, you better write good because I've already sold 50 million books and I'm coming at you like a fucking buzzsaw." And I loved that. A lot of people would feel like very put off by that level of aggression, and I found it incredibly charming and really liked my time with him. And I feel ready to do my version of Hatchet, except rather than being in the cold, wild north where he has some expertise, it is going to be on a tropical island during a surf trip gone wrong where I have some expertise.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I'm really excited about it. It's going to be my shortest book to date, which will thrill my editors when they see this, and it's going to be tight and intense and fun and inventive, and it's I'm really excited for
Very cool. Very cool. And then you're coming like a buzzsaw with this book.
it.
Nice. I love that story of Gary Paulson. I had not heard a story quite like that, so that's cool.
Yeah, it's a good one. He was really a renegade, and I think his work meant so much to me as a kid, because of that. It had such a sensory aspect to it. I see a lot of his influence in my own writing and across children's literature, and obviously loved that moment. And yeah, I'm just excited to write this story. I'm excited to get to run it all back again. I really like being on book tour. I spent the whole fall on tour, and I really enjoy that. I love activating live in front of kids, and I treat it a lot like stand-up comedy, and try to, like, excuse me, try to knock audiences out. Like I really go in and try and be like, this is going to be the defining moment of your day, and I hope that I do that well.
Yeah, yeah, love it, love it. Well, I also tend to ask about web spaces, places where people can connect, see the work, follow along, and those sort of things.
Yeah, I have a website, stephenbramucci.com. But I am also really active on Instagram. I don't like Twitter. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. Those are really the spaces where I like to be. I like that they're visual. But yeah, those are the best places to find me. Not huge on TikTok. Not really active. I have a following on Twitter, but I don't do anything there. So yeah, just website, Instagram. That's the key. Facebook, if you're more in my generation.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Which I think I am. Absolutely. Anything that we've missed in the talk through that you want to make sure to mention before we close?
No, that's great. I mean, I think no. I mean, I'll just to give people a 2 second of the book. The book is called Race for the Ruby Turtle, and it's about a kid with ADHD, and he has something, a catastrophe happened that is the fault of that is his fault and the fault of ADHD, and he blames very much on how his brain is wired. And he goes to live with his aunt in the Oregon backwoods
Hmm.
for a week,
Hmm.
and he finds out about a turtle that may or may not have ever existed and may just be apocryphal. Um, and he tries to search for it at the same time as the story of the turtle has made waves across culture, and a poacher comes searching for it also. I think we talked a little bit about my favorite books, and I love True Grit, the
Hmm.
novel. Um, I also love the Coen Brothers movie of it, not the John Wayne version, but the Coen Brothers one. But I love the idea of the desperado coming towards you across the plains. And so there's a poacher from Texas who drives to Oregon, where I'm from, and comes looking for the turtle. And we see a little bit of the book. Most of my novels, actually, all of my novels at this point, have had a POV switch. So we see a little bit of the book through his eyes, and he was certainly a fun character to write.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sounds like it. Sounds like it. Well, Stephen, thank you for the time. I'm glad to connect anytime to talk about the
Uh,
books as they're coming to be. And thank you for talking with me about your creativity.
thank you so much. Have the best day, and I really appreciate your time and energy today. And goodbye from me and the library here.
Uh, Goodbye to you both, and thanks again. And glad to have you back anytime.